Thank you, Rex Richardson on trumpet.
Paul Rucker on the trumpet.
I always have to say that one of my favorite things about playing music is you can go anywhere in the world. We haven't played together, so you saw us play together for the first time. And it's a magical thing. We both have traveled different parts of the world, and I remember going to Hungary and playing a show there, and I couldn't speak the language. If you've ever tried Hungarian, it's not something you can just take a one-on-one class or the basics and get. But I was able to play, all blues. I was able to play, A-Train with people that, I couldn't have a basic conversation with. So,
Yeah.
So you've traveled a lot, and you've played with one of my favorite musicians of all time. And how did you end up here? I mean,
Here.
yeah.
Well, what a good question. As we were talking a little bit before about our backgrounds and where we're going to end up in the future, but as far as I arrived here, it was a bit of a circuitous route, really. I think I mentioned to you that I ended up having an undergraduate degree in anthropology, and even that was a bit of a circuitous route to get to that. I kind of always figured I was going to be a trumpet player from the time I was about 14, and went to study music, and for various reasons wasn't really happy with the program at the time. But I liked the school and figured, I was in the Chicago area, I could learn to play by going out to jam sessions and hanging out with other musicians in the area.
Did you have any family pressure to study something other than music, or did?
I didn't really. My folks thought I was kind of crazy. They didn't really understand because I didn't come from a musical family, but they were really supportive. To their credit, they, if I needed a horn, they helped me, save and get a horn. And if I needed to try to do this music festival or camp in the summer, and they were really supportive. I think they were more confused when I decided to drop out of music as a field of study because it had been such a focus for me. But then basically by the time I graduated, I was making my living in Chicago doing studio work and freelancing and doing a little bit of teaching, and started touring extensively 2 or 3 years out of school. And then basically when I was 29, as a sort of strange chapter in my life was I'd moved to New York by then, but I left New York City for Louisiana because of a girl. It's one of those things that just happens, Someone's applauding. So that didn't work out so well. And this, I did get engaged to this young lady, but that kind of fell apart. But I did end up going to graduate school for music, which is something I would not have done if I'd stayed in New York. So I was an older student. I was 29. I had a lot of experience as a performer, but I went in and did a master's and a doctorate at LSU in Baton Rouge. And from there, by then I was looking to try to teach. I got to do a sabbatical placement at Ithaca College in New York for a friend. And while I was there, I got to interview here, just lucky timing, where I was just getting my first taste of full-time teaching as a sabbatical replacement. And I had a couple folks on the faculty here who knew me from Chicago just by luck, and I'm sure their vote of confidence helped me kind of get through the interview process. And so by the fall of 2002, I was here as an assistant professor of trumpet, and still here 16 years later almost.
Cool. Super.
And I could ask you the same. How did you end up here? I'm amazed, as I mentioned you in the note, I see you as this sort of I think a phrase I use and I'll stick by it is a prodigious polymath. The number of areas you've you've demonstrated a great accomplishment is amazing to me. I feel like a one-trick pony. I can kind of play some trumpet, but you've got all this stuff going on. I don't know how you keep it all together and keep your skill set fresh on all sides. And how do you do that? And how did you end up here?
Oh boy, I'm gonna come up here. I just destroyed something. Sorry about that. So I'm actually really good with electronics. Typically, I know how things put together.
This is going to be in the outtakes, right? Is that a?
Like a Benny Hill school. You know, when you're younger, you like putting things together, taking things apart. And I really feel sorry for kids that don't get to tinker with things because they don't get to put things together anymore.
You're a polymath.
Yeah.
I told you.
So, I don't have a degree in anything, and my route to get here is a lot longer than the typical route. I attended college in South Carolina, and University of South Carolina. I went on a scholarship playing double bass, and I got tenure with the South Carolina Philharmonic Orchestra. I loved playing with orchestras then. But one day I just kind of lost it, and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I had tenure with the orchestra, and I put my bass down, and I left the music, and I left during intermission. I never went back. You can't get fired, by the way, even with tenure if you don't show up. So I lost that gig, but then I started writing music. I moved to Seattle and was writing music, and I wanted to work with Bill Frisell and some other people, Wayne Horowitz and some people, and I was fortunate enough to do that. And but I wanted to figure out a different way to tell stories, and I thought music, was one way, but visual art was another way. So that's one of the reasons I'm fortunate enough to be here with the ICA, and I'll be here for part of the inaugural show, and I'll be showing some work that I'll show you in a minute. But I think I like different methods of communicating in art because you don't have to do just one thing, and I think I was so naive when I was younger. I didn't realize that people, when they talk to you about their limitations, when they talk to you about your limitations, they're really talking about their own limitations. So I think you can do pretty much a lot of different things, but it takes you a while though. I'll be 50 next month, and it's like I spend a lot of time on music, and I've spent a lot of time on visual art and animation and just different things, and I want to try writing next. So I'm still trying to figure it out, and I don't do it all well. I'm juggling right now, juggling everything.
I suppose that's a matter of perspective. I think by anyone else's estimation, you're doing all of it quite well.
Well, I like most of us here, we had highly critical parents. So yeah, I saw heads go up and down. And because we have highly critical parents, most of what we do is never good enough. That way, because of that, a lot of what we do is actually better than most. And thank you, Mom, for that.
Yeah.
I always
Thank
think
you
it's
for the neurosis and the high achievement, right?
Exactly.
I
I think neurosis is an obsessive compulsiveness is a major gift from our parents. I mean, if you ask a musician typically, hey man, are you pretty good? If they say, yeah man, I'm really good, they probably aren't very good. If they say, yeah, I'm okay, that's the guy you gotta watch.
Working on it, yeah.
I'm working on it. That's the one you gotta watch.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I feel like if I ever get out of that frame of mind of working on it, then maybe something's gone askew. Every musician that I've admired, I find they don't really think they've got it figured out yet, and that's certainly been an inspiration to me to keep digging more deeply. And I'm always amazed at how much I learn from my students too. Whether it be people in the VCU music program or people I'm meeting on travels, doing a clinic. There's anyone who feels like the learning is mostly one direction, I think is missing a big part of the process.
Exactly, we're constant students. I want you mentioned not being good enough or not performing well enough, and that's the trait that Miles had. It was never good enough. Hendrix, same thing. It was like they were not really self-congratulatory. It's like you could always kind of just keep going. And once you're satisfied with what you're doing, that's when you're going to just die creatively, unfortunately. And you got to keep that going until you die, basically. My mom's My mom is one of my biggest inspirations. She received her music degree through a mail order course called the U.S. School of Music. She gave herself a recital. She learned to play organ through a mail order course. And she still learns, and I just saw her yesterday. I was in South Carolina visiting her, and I was showing how the internet works, you know, how she can do Google searches, and we searched, you know, cat, dog, and then she's a big fan of the Bible, so we're searching verses, and she still, at 86, she can still spout out verses from memory, and she knows over 100 hymns, and this is not an exaggeration. She knows each verse. And I think that's going to be the thing that's going to keep her from not, you know, getting Alzheimer's or dementia. I think the exercise in that part of our brain.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to embarrass you a little bit. There's a story I want to share. You're somewhat modest, but I was living in Seattle, Washington, about 20 years ago, and I saw Joe Henderson, and you were there.
I was on the band. Whoa.
Yes. So this is not our first. I didn't get a chance to meet you, but I saw you perform 20 years ago, and I remember how impressed I was with the band. It was also a hard show too, because Stefan Harris was playing, he was killing it, and Joe was just barely standing at times.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know who Joe Henderson is or not, but he's just one of the giants of jazz, and just some amazing music, and one of the amazing pioneers that I wish I would have met him, but it was great to be at that show. But even as he was frail and barely playing, everything he played was magical.
Yeah.
What are some highlights of you playing with Joe Henderson?
Well, man, this is amazing to hear you say that, because I remember that week or so, 5 days, I guess it was maybe.
It's 5 days, yeah.
Jazz Alley.
Jazz Alley.
And what really stands out to me about that particular gig is that was, I mean, we played that hit, and then we flew to San Francisco, I think it was that Sunday morning, and got off the plane and played a concert there, the Stern Grove Festival, and then Joe was done. He went into the hospital that afternoon, and he never performed again. So you saw Joe right at the very end of his career, and I had the it was a great honor for me to play with him. It was also very sad to be essentially his last trumpet player. And when I started getting to play with him, I was hoping, well, this would be a great long-term association. I'm going to learn all this stuff from Joe and all these other great guys in the band. But it only lasted, I mean, not even 9 months really, because of Joe's health, you know. But the highlights had to do more than anything with just being on stage a few feet away from Joe doing his thing. And to marvel at the physical frailty that had overtaken him, and yet hear him sounding like just he did when he was at his peak in the 60s was just staggering to me. And one of the great challenges for me on that band is, you know, there were 3 horns typically on that band, and there was a trombone player named Conrad Herwig who was a crazy virtuoso player, and Joe was like this genius. So I'm like, okay, great. I got like Einstein on the tenor saxophone. I got Hercules on the trombone. Where do I fit in this mix? And at first, this is a great source of stress for me, man. The first few hits I played, I'm just trying to find the relative energy, and eventually, though, it started to feel natural. And I think it was actually Conrad who helped me with that. He could sense my just freaking out about playing with Joe, and through a little bit of counseling, helped me to sort of find my energy. But that was a tremendous experience, and I'll always be grateful for the chance to have had the chance to have been able to make music with Joe and those guys. It was just sad to see him in that state, you know. And he lasted for a couple more years before he passed away. But we were always hoping he might recover and maybe, you know, get back on the road. But of course, it never happened.
Yeah. I saw Jim Hall at Jazz Alley too before he passed, and he was still playing. I mean, it's amazing. He's a great guitar player, and it's amazing to see these guys that are still able to have this magical thing. There's a bass player named Buddy Catlett. He's from Seattle. He played. He's the bass player on "What a Wonderful World," Louis Armstrong, He passed away a few years ago, but I remember a couple of years before he passed, they did a not a benefit concert, but a tribute concert, and all the bass players in town played. But then when Buddy played, he didn't play the showiest stuff, but he had the most soul and the most heart. And I think it's from this time period when these guys went on the road for 200 something days out of the year or more, and they were recording multiple albums every year. Do you think that's going to come back anytime soon? Do you think we're missing something now as far as music or art for that matter? Because we're so distracted with our phones and digital cable and other things. Are we losing our heart?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I see it from two sides for musicians. I think on the one hand, the music really thrived under those conditions, but I also think it was really hard on the musicians themselves. It's like we were chatting before. It's like I imagine if I weren't in this situation I have here at VCU, the amount of time I would need to spend on the road just to kind of sustain my standard of living would mean my quality of living would probably decline. My wife would probably leave me, and if I'm out on tour 300 days a year, I think a lot of things would not be as good. So it's an interesting dichotomy, I think. I think our society's evolved in a direction where a lot of musicians are finding better lives for themselves, but the music is not necessarily evolving the same direction. I think one thing that struck me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is that jazz has gone down a path where it's a little harder for your music lover who's not specifically a jazz fan to engage with the music. And I think it started, if you think of what I attribute this to, a couple of factors. I'd love to hear your thoughts. One is that in the bebop period, of course, a certain evolution began in terms of what the musicians were focused on. Jazz moved out of the dance halls, and it became much more about a cerebral art form in the hands of Charlie Park and Diz and those guys. And then when Coltrane came along, he took it to another level. I think you have a lot of performers trying to combine the sort of formulaic approach of the bebop period, playing the melody, playing a string of solos, playing the melody again, combining that with the mammoth scope of what Coltrane was doing, and mostly I think it doesn't really work very well. And I've noticed in your recordings that you do something very different from that, which I appreciate, because I feel like this is where the music, it makes sense on its own terms, and it doesn't end up being stuck in a position of display virtuosity.
You summed it up really well. I think when you think about when Coltrane passed in '67, he already set the standard of playing to where he kind of ruined it for everyone. It's kind of like Bach in classical music. It's like everything after Bach is just kind of, I think the bar is set. Okay, Christian McBride talked about, you were around during the whole Young Lions thing.
Yeah.
And the one thing about the Young Lions thing is they were marketing, you played sax, Coltrane, or Parker, trumpet, Miles. And Christian McBride, Ray Brown. Christian McBride said in an article once, he said, we're not going to be allowed to be great because people keep comparing us to these older guys. So so I think you were in a period of time where an authentic voice was not lauded as much as someone who sounded like so-and-so.
Right.
And that was a hard place to be. I really felt, I remember hearing Joshua Redman's album, Mood Swing. I just loved that album, but it wasn't like, Miles or whatever. And I just love Brad Mehldau, the people that came from Brian Blade that came out of that band. They have strong voices, but it's still deeply rooted in that tradition.
Yeah.
So I think nostalgia and history can really be crippling to our own creativity. I think you study. I think that there's a problem with studying too much and imitating your heroes. You got to destroy your heroes. You got to try to not up your heroes, because you're not going to be able to do that. But working on your own authentic voice is one of the most difficult things. So you say my music is different. I can't. I mean, I love playing swing and stuff, but that wasn't where my heart was. My heart is in free improvised music and playing extended technique and doing strange things with my cello. But I've been fortunate enough to make money doing that. I mean, there's plenty of people making strange sounds that are not making any money doing it, but you just don't know. I mean, you try to cast your fate into the wind of I'm doing this authentic thing, and this Hugh Frazier, I don't know if you know Hugh or not, he's a trombone player. He taught at BAM for a few years. He
I've heard of
taught
him.
the jazz orchestra. Amazing guy. Had a wonderful time there. He would say this, you know, the song "There'll Never Be Another You." He would look at us and say, "There'll never ever be another you ever," and just nurture your own individual voice. And that really moved me. I mean, it really moved me when I'm in my late 20s and early 30s. So then I started developing my own style of playing. But I think when jazz went to college initially, it hurt jazz.
Yeah.
And it hurt the old players in the clubs. And when it became that heady thing, and yeah.
It's interesting because I think people have, you know, different paths of finding their voices too, you know, and I think in my case, I don't know, I'm not sure if anyone knows in trying to assess themselves, you know, how original is my voice? It's a strange question to ask, and I think that doesn't happen for everyone, where other musicians and people who are, consumers of the music are going to hear what you do that way. Mm-hmm. But I found in my case, what I wanted to do was absorb as much as I could and hope that something in combined effect would come out that might be a little different. And some people bust right through that. You know, I think of like what Ornette did when he came on the scene.
Exactly.
And it was like there was a bit of Bird in there, and the rest of it was something else from outer space. You know, and that just didn't seem to be something I could do. And I do feel like the weight of the history of the music and the trumpet, and in my case, dealing with, as you have, because obviously you are a symphonic musician, classical music as well as jazz, and so I've got all the weight of my trumpet heroes on me, the weight of my various jazz heroes that has been there, and it takes an act of courage at some point to say, you know, that's no longer important. I've paid those dues, or I don't need to pay those dues, as the case may be, and to move on into something that is truly an original thing. I think maybe what it comes down to is for each of us, what you find as your own vital voice. It could be playing like Louis Armstrong. Ain't never going to be Louis Armstrong exactly, but it could be that your tribute to that is what you have, and it could be that it will be something that no one has ever heard before. And I'm not sure how much conscious control we have over.
I think it's,
you know.
but it brings you joy. I think if it brings you joy, if you are sounding like Louis Armstrong, then you can't lose.
Yeah.
If it's bringing you true, authentic happiness.
I agree with that.
And,
I think that's it's a different way to define authenticity than we get sometimes. And I like that one because you might be playing something completely new, but you don't really feel it. Mm-hmm. You know, and how well is that really going to work, and how sustainable is that if it's not feeding you in that internal sense, feeding your soul, as one might say. And that's why I feel like we may have only somewhat conscious control over whether that becomes something innovative or not. You know?
Yeah. You know that test you do when you want to throw away something, you have objects in your place, you pick it up, and if it feels like you need it, if you don't, let it go. I think that's with our instruments as well. I think the day I pick up my cello and I just don't want to do it anymore, I'll just have to stop. And I stopped playing music for about 4 years, and I worked as a janitor at the Seattle Art Museum, and it felt really good. It felt really good to just sweep floors and mop at night and pick up trash, and I did the garbage, and I just stopped playing because I kind of got burned out. When I came back, I started playing cello, and but I think it's got to feel good, and it's okay to stop. I kind of wish we could tell our kids that you don't have to immediately go to college. You know, take a year off. But that's like something that you could never say in my household growing up. They expected you to go somewhere so they could tell their family members or friends that you are in college somewhere. But I wish there was more of a custom situation where you could say, you know, I would have liked to have gone to Europe for a year, but we definitely did not have the money to go to Europe for a year or whatever. But I don't know. I'm kind of digressing a little bit. You want to talk about your new project? Because we have a few slide packers. How are we doing on time? Because we're just kind of rambling on here.
Are we in control of the slide thing? Is that how this works? Well, dig that. I don't know what each button. Okay, I see green. Let's try. So that goes.
I think the button on the right.
Oh. So that's mine. This is actually part of an ad that Summit Records is placing in a couple of publications this May. And I submitted it just because I felt like it sort of summed up some of the work I'm doing now. And they're kind of hyping it. I mean, the paragraph, there's a bit of hyperbole in there, I would say. But it shows what I've been working on lately is a set of new trumpet concertos. And so for those of you who are maybe not as well acquainted with classical music, the term concerto, I mean, really it's just an Italian word for concert, but it also has a particular meaning with instrumental forms where you have a solo instrument offset against a larger ensemble, and most traditionally with symphony orchestra. And in this case, on this album, they're either wind orchestras and wind ensembles or English-style brass bands, where you have a bunch of brass instruments, percussion, and some of the instruments that you don't see as often in the American ensembles, like you have cornets and tenor horns and some strange instruments that don't show up as much. As we have a brass player here, I think Ballard knows what I'm talking about. But these concertos were all in one way or another funded through VCU. I was fortunate to receive the Presidential Quest Fund grant in 2015 that allowed for the composition of 4 new concertos, and a couple of them are now exist both for wind band and brass band. One of them was is a double concerto for trombone and trumpet and wind ensemble. And it turns out this was the most difficult of the 4, especially for the ensemble. And the composer is a guy named Dave Sampson, who's originally from Charlottesville and lives in New York now. And he wrote it for Joe Alessi, principal trombone of the New York Philharmonic, and myself. And I was thrilled by this because Joe's been one of my brass heroes since I was a kid, and we brought him down here to do the world premiere. But we also decided it wasn't going to be very easy to record it in terms of logistics and budget. So the Plough, Scott, and Vizzuti concertos that are listed there were 3 of the new concertos. And Stevenson was written in 2010 with support from VCU Music. And that's been something I've been enjoying playing a lot since I think I've had about 30 performances in 20-some countries. I'm not entirely sure, since 2010. So that's been a very fortunate musical vehicle for me. So that's what's coming up next. That's my next project.
So Al Vizzuti wrote one of the pieces?
Yeah. Alan Vizzuti is a pretty famous trumpet virtuoso, another hero of mine since I was a kid. And it's funny, there's another Seattle connection there, because Al, of course, has been living in the Seattle area for a long time. And I'd never met Alan at the time that I played with Joe there, but I cold called him, because we're both Yamaha guys. So I got his number. I said, Mr. Vizzuti, I'm playing with Joe Henderson. Would you be willing to come down and see the show, and I'd get you on the guest list. And he was so gracious, because I was really nervous calling one of my heroes up, Alan. And it was like his daughter's birthday. So he was in for the night, and he had to leave the next day on tour, but he was very kind. And when we actually met in person a couple years later, he remembered me. He's just that kind of a person. And since that became a really nice association, we played together a lot, and he's become a good friend. So he was one of the first people I thought about getting some music written by when the opportunity came along.
Yeah, I love his playing. I played in orchestra when he performed in South Carolina. I can't remember if it was the college orchestra or the Philharmonic. It was one of the
Yeah.
two. They kind of blurred together. But it was amazing to hear him
Yeah,
play. It was
he's
really-
incredible. There's no one like him, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And he turns out to be as a nice a person as he is a musician. So it's amazing.
Yeah, that's cool.
So next slide here, oh, it's more of me. Sorry. This is just the other albums. You will notice an alarming hairstyle for Pandora's Pocket. That was when I was 26. I was never quite as hostile as I looked. I was just trying to, mug for the camera, I guess. And yeah, so those are my previous recordings.
So what's your favorite recording so far?
Favorite?
Yeah.
I'm hoping this next one in May is going to be
Good
the favorite
answer.
one.
Good answer.
Each one has things that I'm happy about and things I kind of would love to do over. I think that's probably just the nature of being a musician. And I wonder about that with visual artists because obviously you do both. And maybe it's easier sometimes to revise what you've done in the visual arts. But
It's different, I think. We all rehash. We have our vocabulary, and we have ideas that we're expanding on. And how many people are art majors here? Art? Okay, cool. Music? No music. Other? A lot of other. What are the other things? Engineering. Biology. Nuclear science. I'm going to stay away from you. Okay.
too much brain power in this
That's
room.
it.
Wow.
That's cool. Anything else? Why? Any education, folks? Thank you. All right.
Next slide.
Oh yeah,
That
that's
would be
my
you.
stuff there. So I make clan robes. I make the best quality clan robes in America today. And there'll be 52 of them at the ICA in a few weeks. They'll be dressed in a piece I call Shelter in a Time of Storm. I saw a Klan rally around 25 years ago in South Carolina where I grew up. And I never thought about the Klan that much for 25 years, and I started making work about the Klan later, particularly the second wave of the Klan. The second wave that started in the 1920s, spawned by Birth of a Nation, the movie, spawned by the troops coming back from World War I, and folks saying, immigrants, get out of here. Black folks, we want our jobs. So that wave had about 5 million members. About 5% of the US population were members of the Klan in the 1920s. That was the same population as New York City at the time. So, and the Klan robe factory in the Buckhead neighborhood of Georgia had to become a 24-hour factory to keep up with the demand. They had to keep 20,000 robes on hand at all time to keep up with the orders. So these robes have toured across the country, Seattle, Washington, here at the art fair. They've been in Ferguson, Missouri, York, Pennsylvania, Baltimore, Maryland. I also make artwork using non-traditional things like guns. I've been doing work around police violence, particularly against people of color, for years. This is my work zone paper. I'll take a semi-automatic gun and I'll shoot the number of shots correlating with how many times a civilian was shot by the police. This was a couple that was shot in Cleveland in 2012. The police shot them 137 times, and they were unarmed. So just like this past weekend, when you have Stephen Clark, who was shot 20 times in his backyard because they thought he had a gun, but it was a cell phone. We have Amadou Diallo, who was shot 41 times. We have Sean Bell, who was shot 50 times. We have Oscar Grant, who was shot once. We have Eric Garner, who was choked. We have Alton Sterling, who's just, I guess they just said they weren't going to press any charges against the cops. But a lot of my work is about bringing attention to this aspect of our history and our current history and how it keeps repeating itself over and over again. So I also do work around civil rights figures. This is a wooden sculpture. It's called September 15th, 1963. It's named for the Alabama church bombing victims, the 4 black girls that were killed in Alabama and a lot of music made about that. Coltrane, you know, and in the person who committed this crime, one of the people, he didn't get prosecuted in the year 2000 for bombing that happened in '63. And the only reason he was prosecuted because he was bragging to his family about it. And he finally went to prison and spent his last days there. But it was something he was proud of. He was a Klansman, by the way. I've also marked slave revenue locations in Baltimore, and I'm planning on doing the same thing here. I mark them with the GPS tracking technology where you can actually go to the different locations. And also marked them with a physical sculpture with custom LEDs. So I do a lot of different things, but really bringing light to history that we have. And I collect a lot of artifacts. You'll see many, many artifacts of the ICA, including this one, which is a slave branding iron. It was used on runaway slaves that were captured. They would be branded runaways, and as a punishment, sometimes on their thigh, sometimes on the chest. They were to repeat running away, they could be branded on their forehead. And I also have a ship's branding iron. It'll have some neo-Nazi material, Klan material from the Women's Auxiliary. Yes, there was a Women's Auxiliary that had about 500,000 members across the country. Yeah, they were very organized. So a lot of my work is about, in short, the ideology and what the Klan wanted 100 years ago is in place today, but it's not being sustained and carried out in policies by the pointy hat guys. It's carried out by everyday people in everyday life. We have segregated schools, segregated neighborhoods, and disparity in employment. We have disproportionality of people of color incarcerated. We have environmental racism. We have voter oppression of black folks. And I can go on, but it's about the long-term impact of systemic racism, which we can see in every single institution in this country today. And I think if we dismantle and look at these objects, and we can look at these symbols like the Klan robes, lynching postcards, and other things. I don't know if I brought a lynching postcard or not. Oh yeah, I collect books as well. This book will be on display. It talks about how it portrays black people as criminals. And other books have portrayed black people as not being human, not having a soul. This is a real book by Charles Carroll. This is actually his personal copy that'll be on display. This is from 1903, St. Louis, Missouri. But we just had the anniversary of Souls of Black Folks, you know, and that was actually a response to this book because, you know, there were books about what's the ethnological status of black folks. Are they human? You know, I have books. This book talks about black people being a product of a white woman being raped by a beast, an animal. So there's a lot of this narrative that's, I know I'm talking for a long time, but this has been on my mind lately after this last shooting, this criminalization. Like, how do you confuse a cell phone with a gun? How can you not be able to sit in your own backyard of your grandmother's place? Why are these mass shooters not being called terrorists? What kind of narrative do we have? Why do we have this disproportionality in wealth in this country? Why are there nice black neighborhoods? And I'll pay for your next semester's tuition if you can tell me where a nice black neighborhood in this country is. Anyone? Tell me one. I'll cover your whole next year's tuition. Huh?
Harlem.
Oh, you been to Harlem lately?
What big neighborhood is Harlem?
Black neighborhood.
Black neighborhood,
Bill Clinton's in Harlem. His office is there.
But, all right, so,
Can you tell me a black neighborhood that has black-owned businesses where blacks are living in houses that they actually own? Because if you go to cities like Baltimore or here, you may see black folks in houses, but they don't own houses. 50% of the houses in Baltimore, for instance, are actually not owned by the black folks who live in those houses. So if you show me a black neighborhood owned by black people, thriving black-owned businesses, I'll cover your tuition.
I know Duke Ellington lived there, but that's...
That probably, okay, good point. When it was then, it was there. We had Jackson Ward here. We had Churchill here. We have Fulton here that's currently being destroyed. Yes, we did have them, but they're going away. But it's not by accident. It's by a system that we've created. Thanks for that time there. I needed to rant for a second.
No, man. I mean, this is something one thing I've admired about, I mean, I watched your TED Talk video, and you're delivering this material that is clearly very disturbing, and some of it not everyone's going to be aware about until they're introduced to it by one means or another. But you have this very calm presentation. You present it as an object to be observed. It's like, look at this, what do you think? You know, and it's sort of the opposite of shrillness, if I can call it that.
It doesn't go very far. Yeah, it doesn't work.
I
learned that early on. I could raise my voice, but the thing is, if you're a woman and you are assertive, you can be known as the bitchy woman. If you're a black man, you're known as the angry black man. So I learned that keep my nice, calm voice and say stats like, you know, if I say, you know what, you benefit from a system that really disproportionately helps you and not others, is a lot nicer than saying, you know. Yeah, I won't say that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There are a lot worse ways to say that.
There's worse ways, and it's like that lemonade or vinegar or sugar thing. I don't know. I think if you calmly give a stat about there are 5 million Klansmen out there, you know, in the 1920s, you know, or cotton sales in 1920 were $200 million, that would equal $5 billion today. It's a lot. It gives people a chance to digest it as opposed to yelling at them.
Yeah, I think it's in our political environment now. It's we get a lot of people kind of effectively yelling at each other, whether it's just in writing, whether it be on Twitter or on Facebook or whatnot. And I think what's weird to me is witnessing how people don't seem to be able to really talk to each other right now. Yeah. That's most disturbing. I mean, I see some people express some things that really disturb me, and other things I agree with, and yet I'm disturbed by the expression of it, because I'm like, no one's gonna, you're making sense, but no one's gonna actually engage with this if they're coming from the other position, because they're gonna feel attacked, and it feels like everyone's just attacking all the time. So to see your kind of presentation, I think to me is encouraging. And it's something I've always struggled with, is like how, one thing I feel like I've not really done is integrate my music with a lot of socially relevant messages. It hasn't been, at least not on the face of it. I mean, I suppose there are different levels at which where we can touch people's sensibility and how they think about things. But I see your approach as being instructive to me. You know, a way to reach out in a way that is going to give people who maybe don't understand the significance at first a chance to digest and consider, rather than feeling like they got to throw up walls if they're not immediately in agreement. You know?
I think that giving people an opportunity to respond, which I guess we need to do in a second to get a little Q&A, but I think I'm trying to change the narrative. I think when we can't talk about women getting raped. We have to talk about violence against women. We can't talk about poverty. We need to talk about disparity in wealth. I mean, depending on how we start, any kind of discussion will help us lead to possible solutions, but at least we can have more of a conducive conversation where we can actually come up with answers. Because when I hear people talk about we have poverty, or we have crime. We have crime because we have poverty and because we have these disparities. But you want to open up to questions?
Sure.
Any questions, answers, concerns, grievances? Just kidding. No, I'm kidding.
All right, I have a question for you. You say you do all these things with music and art and animation and all that, and I was wondering, how do you balance all of that in a day-to-day? Do you try and get a little bit of each thing done in a certain amount of time, or do you just go from one thing to another and focus on each individually?
how do I balance all the things, different things that I do? Well, I have a museum opening in a few weeks, and also have a TED Talk in less than 2 weeks. So I'm going to leave here. I'm not going to be here for the gala, but I'll be here for the grand opening. So whatever's directly in front of me at the time is what I focus on the most. And I'll have 18 to 20-hour days as it gets closer. And then after the TED Talk and I come back here, I'll collapse. But honestly, it's just, sometimes I can only think about what's right in front of me at the time. But I think it's that 10,000 hours thing is luckily I'm 50 now, so I have a lot more opportunity to have 10,000 hours in the past. But even when we don't play, even if we're on the plane traveling, we're still playing. I play my cello every day, even if I don't pick it up. If I don't have my cello around, I'm thinking about playing my cello. If I can't make art with my hands, I'm sketching. I think it's this obsessive compulsive aspect, and it's good and it's also bad because I never stop, and I wonder why I'm so fatigued sometimes. And but I love my job. I love what I do, but I think I can't stop. So that's a wonderful gift, and yeah. Yes, ma'am.
You said that the way you help people understand is by calmly giving facts. But what do you do in situations where people just refute your facts? How do you handle that?
You can't. Mean fake news?
Or fake news, or people just saying, well, you're wrong, and they try to pick holes, even though you know, like, here are my facts, here's, I back them up. How do you handle people like that?
I've given people links to things. People, trolls come after me, which is really funny. A long time ago, before you were born, Rex and I, we would go to a party and we would argue about something, and there's no way to settle it by picking up our little phones. Now you can settle things. Now you can find things on your phone with reliable sources. But before, if we didn't know something, we would have to just figure it out or wait till we got home and look at that document that had that information, or go to the encyclopedia. You guys know what an encyclopedia is? It was this big row of books, and it would be like A to B and then something B to C. But yeah, I think people, the trouble that we're in right now, this is a short answer, with Facebook, everyone needs to get off Facebook. It's going to actually ruin our society. I've been writing about this for a while now. It is horrible. Our news is curated. They come to us with what we want us to hear. And that's what we're dealing with now, because people want to believe this, and their beliefs are being enforced all the time. And the community that you're referring to, the people who don't want to believe, it didn't happen overnight. This has been cultivated for a long period of time. And it's not that they're stupid. We all just want to believe what we want to believe. We want to have our beliefs enforced. And with my show, there's a 30-page newspaper. I didn't bring it with me today, but I have a 30-page newspaper that goes along with the show that gives you information about the plan, every aspect, first, second, third wave of the plan, and how they gain popularity and their momentum. And I have all these artifacts, and you'll be able to see the artifacts, and it's proof right there. I mean, I have this branding iron that's back here. This is real. It's been authenticated by the Smithsonian, and they branded slaves with it. And we have to do a DNA test, and it has human DNA on it. But some people still don't want to believe that this actually happened, and there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think what's most troubling to me is, before the advent of social media and the way we consume news now as a society, we had our national newspapers, we had our 3 major networks, and there might be slight differences in the way the news was reported, but we were, I think, generally as a society, much more able to agree upon a shared reality. What is a fact? What are the facts? And bizarrely enough, with all the advent of dissemination of information, sometimes in quotation marks, I guess, that seems to have gone away. And I'm inclined to agree with you, as at a certain point, there's not much you can do. If someone decides that, anything that goes against their views of reality is some sort of a conspiracy, the conversation is just not going to go very far. You know?
Yeah, I think the people that are convinced that white people are oppressed more than black people now are the ones that amaze me. But that narrative is out there, and I'm sure someone in this room probably believes that, but is probably too afraid to say something about it. But it's a popular thing, and that's why we have this current administration. It's because some billionaire was able to convince someone in rural West Virginia that they have more in common with him than they have with the rest of America. And one part, I have a convention program from 1923. The Klan had a convention in Asheville, North Carolina. And one of the lines that the Grand Wizard at the time wrote was that the media, in trying to stop us and call us out, gave us $50 million in free advertisement. They're the reason that we have this great rise that we have now. The media made the Klan big in the 20s. The media making fun of the Klan and using the Klan probably to sell advertisements and sell papers made the Klan bigger. And my show Rewind is basically about us repeating the same thing over and over again. And we're in a 100-year cycle. I mean, World War I and the return of troops, like a rise of the Klan, it happened exactly 100 years ago. And the immigration laws that were passed in the 1920s. And we really got to know our history too. I mean, Spanish-American War, what year? Any history majors here? Okay, what year did women receive the right to vote? What amendment? 14th. Nope. 19th. What year? 1920. Someone said it. Okay, Emancipation Proclamation, what year?
1864.
1863. Good. What day?
Oh, Juneteenth?
No, not Juneteenth. No. Start at the beginning of the year. January 1st. That's it. We can go on and on about knowing our history, knowing the amendments, knowing constitutional law, and I forgot how I digressed to that. Next question. Yes, sir, in the back.
There's something I occurred to me that having jazz musicians and artists to get together. So in the 20th century, probably the greatest art movement and the greatest jazz movement happened almost in the exact same time, the exact same place, which are abstract expressionism and bebop. And I'm just in New York, right? So I thought that that's somehow, it obviously had the ashes of World War II, but is that something that's been written about or you've thought about, or the correlation between the two? Because it's phenomenal that these two massive cultural events happen, same time, the same place. I just would appreciate your comments on that.
Man, that's yeah. You have thoughts? I have a
Well, I want to make sure I know exactly what you're talking about, because I understand that abstract expressionism having started decades before that in Vienna as a visual art form. Is this a separate movement that you're talking about?
Actually, Monet was considered to be the father of abstract expressionism, happened before he died, probably in 25, 26 in Paris. So my understanding is Monet is considered to be the father of abstract expressionism. But it's like all the artists who sort of left Europe, the ruins of Europe, settled in New York. And
It developed from there, yeah. That is really interesting.
That's my understanding.
That sounds like a book you got to write, man.
Well, no, I'm sure it's been commented on and written about, but it occurred to me, and I was wondering if it's been, if anybody's talked about that relationship, because it's always been, and you guys have talked about it, artists
Well,
and jazz musicians, so I thought I'd bring it up.
The thing I've noticed a lot over the centuries is how often the visual arts have influenced the development of music. And often there's a lag, when you have the Impressionists, you have the whole slew of the Impressionists evolving in France, and then Debussy kind of picked up on what they were doing. And the same thing would happen with the movement I was speaking of that took place in Vienna, and then Schoenberg and the second Viennese school, these guys kind of finding new ways of expression on the classical side. But this is something in particular you're talking about that I'm not really aware of, but it sounds intriguing. It'd be really cool to learn more about what was happening there, you know?
I think you're thinking about a longer span of time of, if you think about, I want to go back to music and jazz, or music and painting influencing each other. I mean, we have, Jackson Pollock listened to bebop, you know? You think of Hindemith, Matisse de Mahler, one of my favorite pieces, Matisse the painter. You think of pictures, Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition. I mean, there's plenty of links to music and visuals. But I think we had the Harlem Renaissance. We had strong communities then. We didn't have digital cable. We didn't have junk. I think we've been dumbed down, unfortunately, with all the technology and way too many channels. And there wasn't binge watching then. There was people that were just doing stuff all the time. And I think that's going to happen again. I predicted it 20 years ago. We're going to have a new renaissance. We're all going to destroy our cell phones. I think it'll be a beautiful day if we do that. Because we're old enough to remember when you called someone and they didn't have an answer machine, and it was a landline you were calling. Then when you had an answer machine, that was a big deal because you could leave a message. But I really, really miss. I want my sense of direction back, and not use GPS to go home.
See, I never
every
had
night.
one, man. So GPS really helped me.
Really helps you. Yeah. You never had a sense of
I had a
direction?
terrible sense of direction. There's something wrong there.
No.
For me, it was a godsend.
I don't believe that. How are we doing over there?
That's good.
Oh, we got one more question.
You want one more question? Yeah,
Okay.
let's go.
You guys fight it out. You guys.
We can get both of them.
We get both of them. We get both of it. Yeah. Go ahead.
You have a really beautiful sound.
Thank you.
How do you practice, and when do you find time for that?
I'm practicing as we talk right now. No, seriously,
That's
I play it all the
a
time.
really difficult instrument, and with all the things you do for.
I got one of my favorite musicians is Bill Frisell. And Bill if once you learn to play, it's the instrument, but it's also in your hands. Having control. Because when Rex plays, he's thinking about everything he plays, just like I'm thinking about it. It's an extension of our voice. So I think about it all the time.
So Ballard, who asked the question, he's actually a composer and a trombone player and improviser musician. So you think of it this way too, because I wonder, when you were talking about practicing all the time, one of the things I catch myself doing, sometimes at really opportune moments, like my wife's talking to me, there's like a tune going through my head. It's not a tune, it's a set of chord changes. And I'm improvising over the chord changes. And my wife will catch it on my eyes, start to go. And she's like, "Hey, Rex." I'm like, "Yeah," and then I'm in trouble for. But there's like a process that you're walking down the street, and there's like often it's a Coltrane tune because they have, lots of crazy changes to go over. And I imagine probably you did some of the same, some of the same stuff, where it's like and so that translates directly to what I'm going to do on the trumpet. I think one thing that's punishing about the trumpet or the flugelhorn, and you understand this as a brass player, the trumpet is notorious for like, your conditioning to play goes away really quickly.
Every day is like starting over.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if I don't play for one day, I come back, it's like, here we go. And sometimes that's just forced on me by travel days, or if I happen to get too sick to play or something, which thankfully doesn't happen very often. But so I envy some instruments. I imagine with cello, it's not quite as bad as that in terms of the mechanics of it. Most instruments are not quite as bad as a trumpet, where you get out of shape very quickly. But it's mostly a mental game, isn't it?
It's a mental game. Yeah, I think with horns, I forgot what a horn player said this. You miss practicing one day, you know it. If you miss practicing 2 days, everyone else knows it. And it is kind of different with the cello, because I played bass for years, and I think once you get to a certain place, you can stop playing for 2 or 3 weeks. Sometimes I'll play a show and I haven't played for 2 months, and then I'll go play again. But I'm thinking, you know that experiment they did with the people with basketball? They had a group of people who didn't play basketball, people who did play basketball, people who thought about playing basketball. The people who thought about playing basketball did better than the people who didn't play basketball at all, but not as well as people who actually played basketball. Real research. So actually thinking about helps, but you don't have an embouchure with the cello, but you can have calluses. Intonation can go. Intonation is one of the things that can go very quickly with the cello playing if you're not playing regularly. But yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little more about your approach to narrative and telling stories? Like when you talked about poverty versus disparities in wealth, just talking.
You got to bring everyone into the conversation. If you just say poverty, 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 that's not talking about the rich, 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 or the wealthy, wealthy, wealthy. So, and again, I think if we talk about women getting raped, that's putting the violence on them as their responsibility. If we talk about violence against women, you're bringing in the culprit that's actually perpetuating the violence. See, a lot of times there's so much news as smoke and mirrors. My buddy who told me years ago, we're listening to the news, because I believe all news is fake, by the way, especially if the narrative is twisted around. If we talk about Somali pirates, you ever hear the term American pirates? We are the biggest pirates on the planet, but you never hear the term American pirates. But we hear the term Somali pirates, and why are they pirates? Or people in Nigeria who are fighting because they have 300 oil fires in their water every year. I mean, I think you can make someone the criminal who's not the criminal. You can make someone the hero who's definitely not the hero. So I think there's been this dehumanization of folks. We objectify. We can make anything evil and anything good if you control the narrative. And we get suckered into thinking that we're okay with these cell phones, but they're also our doom too. I really kind of wish I might go back to a flip phone. Man, remember the good old days? Flip phones.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's the phrase that history is told by the victors.
Exactly.
Is a very powerful one, and that's one reason why I do recommend. You mentioned Howard Zinn, the People's History of the United States.
Yeah.
Is a very interesting other side. Just like we're just like every other country, every other civilization on the planet. We always tell the story with us as the heroes, and so our shameful legacies. Maybe the biggest one is probably slavery, the institution of slavery, and the way it grew to such size in this country. It all gets kind of, a little bit shoved aside and maybe a little bit sanitized. And so it's not to say that if you're going to read Howard Zinn, you're going to take every single thing he says as the absolute truth, but you have to know this other perspective. We have to be able to say, well, what's the normal story, quote unquote, that's normally being told? What is this other story, this other side of maybe looking at it from another angle where it's not all about us being the heroes all the time? And can we get more of a clear perspective on who we are really as a nation? Because I think we're just not really taught that.
Yeah, I think a good example of this is if you think about the young kids from Parkland who are out there rallying. It's all fielded and everything, but not a single one of those kids has been talking about the history of guns in relationship to this country, because that's the hard part. If you think about the early slaughter of Native Americans and how the raids happened because they wanted to make sure that Native Americans did not have guns, is horrendous, because he who has guns have the power. And we have, after Sandy Hook, we thought, if nothing happened then, nothing's ever going to happen. And I think we really have to we have to have a historic base for things in order to have any kind of change. You just can't say gun control without defining what that actually means. If you don't understand, after Nat Turner's raid in 1831, it was made illegal for black people to have guns. That was for a reason. It was made illegal for blacks to learn how to read and write. It was punishable by death or life in prison. It was made illegal for blacks to have more than 12 people assembled for a funeral. it was made illegal for so many things. It was just illegal to be black. But the one thing they wanted to make sure was black people could not have guns. Because right now, people are not, they're talking about Second Amendment, but they're scared of losing their guns because they're scared of losing their privilege. And the same privilege those Parkland kids had before this shooting in their school, they have to look at that. They have to look at their predominantly white, safe neighborhoods that they were living in. And have to understand where that privilege comes from. I mean, I never understood privilege until I went to Europe. I mean, when I was treated well, I wasn't treated well because I was a black man, I was treated well because I was an American. And that made me feel like, oh wow, it's kind of mind-blowing. And I was treated extra well because I was a musician, you know. Okay, I gotta ask you one of these racial questions. The Young Lions, they focused on the black guys.
Yeah.
And you know, Benny Green, you know, the other white guys, they were not. There's reverse discrimination in that clearly, because I remember going to one place in Europe, and I'm not a swing player, but I went to this party and they had jazz playing. They heard there was a black musician from America. They pulled me onto the stage as if I'm supposed to just rip like Coltrane, you know, or you know. But how was that navigating that world during that time?
I think it was interesting because I was in that generation where I felt pressure to get my first record out probably before I was ready, because I was entirely classically trained. I came to jazz kind of late, and I made my first record when I was 23. And now when I listen to it, I'm like, should have waited another couple of years, man, you know. But I felt pressured, and part of it was because of that phenomenon, and you know, I didn't fit the maybe the image of what the young lion musicians were supposed to be, and part of that was a racial thing. I think at the time I just sort of, I try to keep a balanced perspective on it. I mean, I think a lot of what was happening is there's some individuals like Wynton Marsalis, who was one of my first big influences and remains so to this day. He had a certain take on who owned the music, you know, and I feel like jazz maybe is bigger than belonging to any one group of people or any particular ethnicity, and now you see it's a beautiful thing that it's disseminated to every part of the world, as you've noticed, you know, and like being able to play jazz in Yugoslavia or Hungary rather than just basically knowing the titles, you know. And I had the same thing happen in Russia. A young piano player didn't speak a word of English, but he knew the titles of jazz tunes, so we could play together, you know. But I think I also understood. I feel like I felt where it was coming from. I felt like, you know, let's face it, black people in society have had kind of everything taken from them for most of the history of the country. And there was this period when it's like, no, kid, you know, we're going to hang on to this. And I kind of feel like I understood it, because what I never got from any of the musicians that I encountered who were at least musicians who seemed to really have command of the music, I never felt rejected because of my race. So I felt like they were going to judge me on my musicianship and the kind of person I was, and that meant a lot to me. So all the kind of noise and the hype that surrounded it never really bothered me that much. I feel like I never felt like, well, this is something I should fight against, because I'm like, you know, man, we're all just people trying to make music, and there are reasons why some people are feeling this sense of ownership of the music, given what's happened in the history of this country, you know.
I think you said it well when you said that's one of the few things that we have left. You know, it really is beyond communities, and is a sense of community. I think you went in respecting the music and the players, and people can tell that is the case. I want to thank John and Sasha and the camera folks and you guys for coming out and sticking with us for extra long, because I really wanted this. I like talking a lot about this stuff. And personally for me, feel free to reach out. I'm bad at responding to email, especially right now with the show, but I want to invite you to the ICA to see the artifacts and things. And do you have any concerts coming up, any shows coming up?
In town, let me think. Most of my stuff is out of town, but I'm playing down the street at the Camel on the 15th of April.
Emilio's at all?
I haven't for a long time. I used to go sit on the jam session sometimes.
Yeah.
I should try to do that again, actually. That's a real nice venue. Lots of nice music happening there at Emilio's. But yeah, trying to get out and play in town more. But I'm definitely going to come see your stuff at the ICA, man. I'm really looking forward to that. And I hope we get a chance to play together some
Oh,
more.
we will.
It's my first chance to play with Paul right there. Y'all heard it.
Yeah.
Well, let's give them a round of applause and thank them for coming and playing. Rex Richardson, Paul Rucker.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Thank you.